Hi guys, it's Grace from Grace Gets Gastric, and I am here today to do a new kind of video, and I'm actually kind of kicking off a pre-op series. So before I got into YouTube, before I discovered YouTube and decided I wanted to make a channel documenting my journey, I actually originally thought that I was going to do like a blog. So I thought I was going to just write about my journey. I wrote a bunch of those pre-op as well before I discovered YouTube. And so I actually documented all of my pre-op process through various blog posts, and I didn't really do any documentation via video, but I thought that I would kind of go back through retroactively and talk a little bit about the different aspects of my pre-op process. I know when I was pre-op, that's one of the things I was the most curious about was how people got started, what they had to do to qualify, etc. And I think part of the reason why there aren't a ton of videos on it is after surgery is obviously like the really exciting part. That's the part where people start documenting or want to talk about it and share. And also just because requirements, etc. vary so greatly depending on what country you live in, what insurance you have, what kind of surgery you're getting, your bariatric center. So there's just so many different factors. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about how everything went for me and take everything with a grain of salt. This is not necessarily how it'll work for you, but this might help maybe some people prepare a little bit. So I actually have, I think, about 6 videos planned talking about different aspects, and this first video I wanted to talk about sort of the general timeline for me from when I decided I want to get the surgery to when I got it. So kind of the timeline of events, and I'll talk about a little bit about my particular insurance requirements. So just a second, this is the Strawberry Crush flavor packet. It's delicious, by the way. Okay. So, everything started for me in early 2017. And sorry, I'm looking a lot because I've got like my blog posts up that I'm trying to reference and remember. But it was March of 2017 where I had my aha moment that everyone who gets the surgery experiences at some point. You hit that breaking point. It's the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's whatever happens that makes you realize I need help, essentially. So for me, it was, I cut myself, I think I mentioned this in my first video, which I'll link above, but I had like scratched my thigh, my inner thigh, and it was bleeding, and it was just, trying to bandage it was really difficult because of all of my, my fat, essentially. It was just too big. I couldn't really get to somewhere where, it hit me. It didn't have to be so hard. Like, this isn't necessarily a normal thing, not something that everyone experiences. My body was preventing myself from taking care of myself, and I wanted that to change. So I immediately started, dove headfirst into researching weight loss surgery for probably at least 2 weeks. Like, that was basically all I did. I mean, I went to work, but even at work, I was, looking up articles, I was reading blog posts. I hadn't even discovered YouTube yet at this point. But I really researched it, looked a lot into it, and I realized I wanted to pursue it. So I researched, or I Googled, basically, bariatric centers in my city, and found a couple, but found one that I was like, this looks like it's legitimate, reputable, etc. It was through a hospital that I'd been to before, and they had seminars. They require everyone to go to a seminar, which they have both surgical and non-surgical options. I obviously wanted to do surgical, and they had seminars every single week. So I booked the first one I could, and that was in March. I think it was early to mid-March that I booked. I went into the seminar. At this point, I'd done an extensive research. The seminar was about hour and a half. They went through the different surgical options that they offered, which I believe they do the VSG, the RNY, and then I think maybe the band. I can't remember. It was interesting. It was nothing that I hadn't heard before. But I'll talk more about that seminar later. So I did the seminar in March, And that is when I did my insurance pre-authorization. And then they were going to call me back. So they did. They called me, I want to say like a week or two later. I was in Chicago at the time. I was visiting a friend. So there's a little bit of back and forth. My office just has like very terrible, I think they're just always very understaffed. So it was like getting a hold of anyone was always such a pain in the ass. But I scheduled, so mid-April, I had my seminar, and by early May, I had my first surgical consult. So I had my first, I had my first surgical consult in early May, and that was about an hour and a half, and I met with like the nurse practitioner person, and I didn't meet the surgeon at all, but I had my first, I'm going into a little bit too much detail because I want to talk more about that stuff later, but I had my first consult, and met with the nurse, and we basically at that appointment went through and scheduled everything else for the rest of the time. And so from then on, at that point, we talked about my insurance requirements. Now, before this appointment, I had already researched my insurance and looked at their requirements, so I had a fairly good idea of what they were, but sometimes like those things are just kind of hard to read, so I wasn't 100% confident that I had everything. For my insurance, the requirements were that you have a BMI of over 40 or that you have a BMI over 35 with a comorbidity. So that's like sleep apnea, high blood pressure, diabetes. So I had diabetes at that time, and I had a BMI over 40, so I was more than qualified. And there was no concern that I would lose too much weight before surgery. I would have had to lose a massive amount of weight. So they were like, you can lose as much weight as you want. And the more you lose, the better. I was also required to do a 6-month medically supervised weight loss diet, where that I think that mine required you meet like every other month, but we decided to meet every single month just to be sure, because we didn't want to get caught out on a technicality. So basically, I had to follow a surgical plan. I put a plan put together by the team, and then had appointments every single month to follow up and talk about it. And those were really the main requirements. So I'm just like confirming. Yeah, those were the, and you needed to have a psychiatric consult. So it was required that you had some kind of psychiatric consult and sign off. All of those things are very common amongst insurance companies. Those are fairly standard. Some don't require the diet or require a shorter diet, but it's pretty common from what I've seen of other people that those are pretty common requirements. In addition, my surgeon required that I got an endoscopy. So I knew at that point that I was leaning between the VSG and the RNY, and I'll talk more about my ultimate decision and all that stuff in a later video. But before my surgeon will do the VSG on any of their patients, he requires that you get an endoscopy to confirm that you don't have any issues with acid reflux, GERD, etc., because of the high instances of that developing post-op with the VSG, particularly if you have any prior issues. So they require you to do an endoscopy if you're thinking you want to have the VSG, which was my preference, so I also had an endoscopy. So, May had the first appointment. I actually scheduled the first psychiatric consult as well in May. So later on that month, I met with the psychiatrist at the bariatric center. I wanted to start my diet as soon as possible. Unfortunately, they were low on dietitians, so the earliest they could get me in was June. Actually, it was originally scheduled for July, and they had a last-minute opening, which was excellent because it moved me up a whole month. So in July, I met with my dietitian for the first time. The June, I met my dietitian for the first time, got all of that information, and then I met with them every single month. So June, July, August, September, October, November, and December. December was, I'll get to that in a minute, but I met with them consistently every month. In addition to those, I also had, I did my endoscopy in August, and then later on in August, when I had my, when I had my dietitian meeting, we scheduled it so that I, it was right after my endoscopy, like a week after. So I also met with my surgeon, and that was the first time I ever met the surgeon, was to go over the results of my endoscopy and ask the surgeon any questions I had. Then in September, I had another dietitian appointment, and I also had a psychiatric consult follow-up. So they liked the program. I mean, my insurance only required one. The program likes you to have a follow-up if needed. Some people have more than just the two. She was fine with me just having the two, and I'll talk more about the psychiatric stuff in a separate video. And then just dietitian straight on until December. And December is when I had my final sign off, basically. So I had a final dietitian appointment. I met with the nurse and I did a final review. I met with the surgeon. We basically did like a sign off, a waiver of everything, and sent things off to insurance for approval. My insurance got back to me quicker than they had anticipated. They said that for my insurance, and it was around the holidays, like 3 to 4 weeks would not be unheard of. I think they took about a week and a half to approve. And then my bariatric center, they called me, let me know it was approved, and said, let's schedule your surgery. We've got, our first one is in 2 weeks. And I was like, I'll take that one. And that was on January 2nd when I had my surgery. So I then did 2 weeks of the pre-op diet, which I did all through Christmas and New Year's. And I'll talk more about that in one of the later videos as well. So yeah, from when I decided to, when I had my aha moment, that was March of 2017, late March 2017, and I got my surgery January 2nd, 2018. So what is that, 9 months, about 9 months from start to finish, and by finish I mean the start of the next part of the journey. It felt like forever at the time, but I was grateful for that time to do as much, continue to do a lot of research, meet people, talk with people, and really prepare myself for this next phase. So yeah, that was my timeline, my insurance requirements, my programs requirements, and like I said, I have several other videos in this series that I have planned. So I want to talk about my seminar and my initial appointment, talk about the medically supervised weight loss diet, those visits, those requirements. I'll kind of just do all of that in one video. I'll do one on the psychiatric evaluations and how those appointments went. I'll talk about my endoscopy and then how I arrived at my decision to get the VSG. And then I'll do a final appointment, my insurance approval, the pre-op diet, all of that good stuff. So I hope you guys are finding these helpful. I know a lot of the people who are watching these videos, who watch them every week, are people who've already had surgery and we're supporting each other. But I also know I get a lot of comments from people who are newly pre-op or who are just considering the surgery or just had their appointment scheduled. So I'm hoping that someone finds these helpful at some point, because I know when I was pre-op, I just wanted to know everything about everything. Forewarned is forearmed? I don't know. I totally messed up that phrase, but thanks for watching, you guys, and keep an eye out for the next of these videos. Bye.